So we've talked about the introduction and we've talked about the body. That leaves us with the last part of an effective speech, that being the conclusion. Now, real quick, I'm sometimes asked, well, Mr. DeBerry, which of these three is the most important? And my answer is always the same. Yes. What I mean by that is one is not more important than the other. They are all important and each serves a different purpose within the speech. The introduction, as we discussed, gets the audience's attention and interests. The body is where you give most of your content. And the conclusion, well, the conclusion is where you reinforce what you said and you want to leave the audience with a good feeling and a good coherent, tie a bow on it, if you will, with your overall speech. Now, how do we do that effectively? Well, that is the subject for this video. Okay, so the conclusion, like I said, is the third part of the speech. Now, I'll also say it's the most abused in that it's one of the ones I commonly see people don't do well. They'll get to the end of their body and they'll just kind of go, okay, thanks. Or, yeah, that's all I got. Or, all right, thanks for having me. No, do a proper conclusion, all right? It brings the speech to a good close. It lets the audience feel that sense of closure. And when done well, really helps, for lack of a better way of putting it, tie that speech up in a nice bow as a whole package. What about the conclusion? How long should it be and what should be in it? Well, let's talk about that. So first off, length. The conclusion should only ever be 5 to 10% of the total speech. That's it. Like the introduction, the conclusion does not have to be long in order to be effective. It just needs to do what it needs to do and do it effectively. Okay, now remember the introduction was 10 to 20% of the speech, but it had 4 things it needed to have in it. Conclusion is only 5 to 10 because it only has 2 main parts. That's it. So it has half as many things that it needs to do. So do these things well, and then you're done. Okay, so what are these things? Well, the first part of any effective conclusion is you need to have a sentence in there that we would call signals the end. What I mean by that is a sentence that really lets the audience know that you've reached the conclusion and kind of helps them remember what you talked about. That's the first part. And the second part is you want to have a part that reinforces the central idea. It kind of really drives home that message that you were trying to give them in a big, overarching way over the course of the body of the speech. Now, how do we do each of these individually? Well, let's start with the first part, signaling the end. Now, as we've talked about before, you can do this signal the end whole thing effectively in just one sentence. That's it. Doesn't take long. You just need one good sentence to check that you've done this correctly. But that sentence has 2 parts. That one sentence has 2 parts that you need to make sure are there. And the first part is you need to always start your speech always start your conclusion with a good conclusion signal. What's that? A conclusion signal is simply a word or phrase that clearly communicates to the audience that you are now at the conclusion. You should see a pattern here. Going back to the video about introductions, remember I talked about how going from one main part of the speech to the next main part is a place where you can lose audience. If they don't catch it, you're making that change. Well, we helped identify the introduction from the body with that body preview statement. Conclusion signal is what lets the audience know I'm done with the body and now I'm at the conclusion. And it's simply a word or phrase. Great one. Classic. In conclusion. We know what that means. All right. You hear in conclusion, oh, they're at the end. People are going to know what that means. All right. But not, in closing. Another one. So just some simple word or phrase that communicates you have arrived at the conclusion. And then right after that, in the same sentence, you need a body recap statement. Okay. And this is kind of like the body preview statement, only in the reverse. In the introduction with the body preview, we told them what we were going to talk about. The body recap, we tell them what we just told them about. Okay, it's past tense. You want to state this at the end just to remind the audience, hey, these were my main points. You could put these 2 together into one sentence very simply. And as always, here's your template, right? So you start with your conclusion signal. So whatever you say, then, so today in discussing, then you state your topic. I have focused, see, past tense, focused on, and then you state the tags for your main point. So in conclusion, so today in discussing with you the basics of magic tricks, I have focused on the basics of card tricks, the basics of levitation tricks, and the basics of disappearing tricks. Done. Part one finished. One sentence, that's all you need, okay? So, and to have this be the very first sentence of your conclusion. Very first words out of your mouth when you get to your conclusion need to be this type of sentence. Start with that conclusion signal, immediately followed by that body recap. Once you've done this, you then can move to the second part of an effective conclusion, which is the reinforcing the central idea, okay? My term for this is I call it a slammer, because the point is to really slam home that overarching message that you were trying to get across over the course of the speech. Now, this next one is more of a guideline than a hard rule, but I continuously find this to be true. A good slammer should be a minimum of 4 sentences in length. Can't just be one sentence. That's not going to really do the job of reinforcing the central idea. 2, not really. 3, but 4 just seems to work here as a good length for reinforcing a central idea. So let's do a little bit of math real quick. If you're writing your conclusion at home, you know you need to have that signal the end sentence. But the in conclusion today in discussing my talk, I've talked about boom, boom, boom. That's one sentence. And then I've just told you this reinforcing central idea part should be 4 sentences. So when you've written your conclusion, how many sentences minimally should you have? The answer's on your screen. 5. Can you have more? Absolutely. But minimally, you want to have that number of 5. And again, the point of this central idea is to really get across the essence of what that speech, really drive home what you were trying to say. And a great way to do this is to refer back to the attention getter that you gave at the beginning of the introduction, because that kind of references it back. It pulls the audience. Oh, yeah. And that puts it in that nice little bow. Okay. For example, in the video about introductions, I gave that example of how to change your own oil with me and my grandfather. So let's say I get to the conclusion and I want to do this. All right. So let's go through this 5 sentences, right? In conclusion, today in discussing with you how to change your own oil at home, I have focused on the tools you needed before you started, the basic process, changing the oil, and lastly, proper cleanup and disposal once you're done. I hope you can see from my speech today that changing your own oil at home is not really that hard. All it takes is a little bit of planning, and you can do it yourself. You know, and if you do the job yourself, you have the knowledge that you know it was done right and effective. But probably most importantly, now you don't have to give up your free time and your pocket money to drink that horrible coffee in the waiting room on a Saturday when you'd rather be spending time with friends or family. Thank you. Had that, gave the 4. See how I reference back to that attention getter I gave with telling the story? That's what you want to do. Reference back to the quote you gave, the person that gave it. Reference back to those hypothetical questions. Reference back to the story you told. Right, and then end on that note. And once you do this part, just say thank you. That's it. So give that in conclusion today in discussing with you your topic, give that signal the end, give that reinforce the central idea section, minimum of 4 sentences, and then say thank you, and you're done. I hope you can see the conclusion is not hard, okay? It doesn't take a lot of time. Just do the things you're supposed to do. Now, here again. Are any of these good conclusions? And I've had each of these given in class before, all right? Peace out. What about, okay, yeah, I'm done. What about this? Mr. DeBerry, what's my time? Or one of my all-time favorites. That was the whole thing. None of those are effective conclusions. Don't skip on the conclusion. Go through the process we talked about for this conclusion, include the steps, use the templates, and that will help you have an effective conclusion to end your speech. And that conclusion will help bring your speech to a good close and help it resonate with your audience so they leave that room after they've heard your speech thinking, wow, that was a great speech.